I joined the club, and now I get to put it on, which is just the craziest, cycle. But I'm really excited to be able to teach this class. And yeah, pass it off to Nate.
Hey everyone, I'm Nate, and like Ava, this is actually it's our first time teaching this course, so we're really excited to be getting to go through this voyage of blockchain with you, and hopefully you can all be really collaborative and feel free to ask us any questions, and we'll just get right into it. So let me just open this up. So anyway, so I'm Nate, and a little about me. So I'm also in blockchain at Berkeley. I am head of social and outreach at blockchain, and I'm currently working with Chain, which is a decentralized app company working on outreach and sales, and I'm a member of the Berkeley Blockchain Xcelerator. So, and we will be your leads for the semester. So just to go through the agenda for today. So we're going to start off with some intros, and then we'll get into like what exactly is Bitcoin for those of you that may not know, and for those of you that do, you get to learn even more. And then we'll go into cryptocurrencies like identity, and then transition to transactions, and then the idea of distributed ledger and DLT, which is distributed ledger technology. And we'll wrap it all up today with trustless consensus. Okay, so got our introductions from us, but just a little bit about blockchain at Berkeley. So first off, blockchain at Berkeley, like Ava said, runs this course, and blockchain at Berkeley drives innovation in the blockchain industry by building an ecosystem that empowers students to make an impact through practical education, which is what we do, consulting for enterprise companies, and conducting open source research. So blockchain at Berkeley, you also hear it be referred to as BAB, does a lot of research through the Xcelerator and through other programs, which we'll introduce in a sec. And so where are our members now? So a lot of us, after we've graduated, I mean, we haven't graduated, we're still undergrads, but people who have graduated or still, while they're a member of BAB, they founded the Blockchain at Berkeley Xcelerator, which is a really great blockchain startup accelerator. And if you have a blockchain company, I definitely recommend applying. And like a big part about it is student run, and it is non-dilutive, which means that blockchain at Berkeley or the Xcelerator, they don't take equity. So it's all focused on advancing your company and your blockchain use case. And then I'm not sure if anyone's heard about Facebook Libra, but it is like the token of Facebook. And so some of our members co-wrote the Facebook Libra white paper, which is really incredible. And then Decrypt Capital, which is an SF venture fund based out of San Francisco, they raised and essentially created this company and raised $20 million for this investment fund. And then a few of our members run SF Blockchain Week, which is one of the largest blockchain conferences in the world. Actually, our past president, Liam, ran most of it. And so he really spearheaded a lot of the process. And then finally, some of our members founded Chief 256, which promotes diversity in blockchain and just in the whole blockchain space. Okay, and then outside of education, which is what Av and I predominantly do, we also work a lot in consulting and do a lot of projects with consulting. We do consulting for like Fortune 500 companies and for a bunch of different current pretty big names. And what's great about that is companies that are a little hesitant to go into the blockchain space or are new to it can really work with us and then find a way to start to transition in and find like an easy point of entry to kick it off. And then going over the Xcelerator. So like I said earlier, the Xcelerator, it is the #1 university blockchain startup accelerator in the US. And it is the only one to offer a student fellows program. And so like 95% of staff at the Xcelerator are students. And it is a great way to transition into blockchain, like the blockchain ecosystem, and to connect with Berkeley and connect resources in that regard. So like I said earlier, if you're interested in that, or you have a blockchain idea or startup or company, definitely apply to the Xcelerator, because there are a lot of great resources involved there. Okay, and so just to get into a little about the course structure. So webinar, we're gonna meet every Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. and we'll start at Berkeley time. So it'll really be 6:10, starting from, that's supposed to be February 4th today, February 4th to April 15th. And so we'll be using the same link. And then in terms of our course setup and for questions, feel free to use B courses. And so we'll be sending out the B courses link later after you fill out the first week's quiz. And so you can start discussions on there, ask questions, that'll all be pretty loose on there. And in terms of assignments, discussions, and everything in there will be just like a traditional course. Lecture will be, of course, it'll vary each time. A lot of times it'll be up to like 90 to 95 minutes, but it might take, there are times when it will take the full hours. And there'll be a lot of 5-minute breaks within. So we'll pause for questions. And if you have questions while we're lecturing, before times that we have like allotted to stop, feel free to put them in the chat and then we can come get back to them. And so right now, I'm screen sharing, so I can't see questions, but I guess Ava will take care of them right now so that you can stay on track with those. And then if you can't make live lecture, then we'll have the recordings available on the B courses page. Okay, and just to get into a few goals for the semester. So we're hoping that you can walk away from this course with a really granular understanding of Bitcoin, and not just Bitcoin in general, but understanding just the world of blockchain in a way that will hopefully empower you to explore different use cases or feel comfortable going into industry. And so blockchain is a really difficult topic. And of course, Av and I are by no means experts, but we're learning just as much as all of you are during this process. And so a lot of it is taking on a growth mindset and being able to go into some uncharted territories and just reason through them and collaborate and find ways to learn. And so that's another one of the goals for the semester. Also, just getting familiar with trends and like notable projects in the blockchain space. I'm sure as many, if not all of you know, there's a lot of really cool things going on with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and DeFi. There's a plethora of topics that we will be exploring this semester, but we hope that in the future you can use this as a framework to address future explorations of blockchain. And then next, just going in with confidence and being able to feel confident to help kind of contribute to the blockchain space. As blockchain and like a lot of blockchain companies and components are open source, so everyone is really welcome to contribute. And so hopefully you'll be able to check that out if you're interested. And then finally, I started off with this a little bit, but to get to know a little bit about the club. And if you enjoy the course and you want to learn a lot more about blockchain after the course, then you're always welcome to apply to blockchain at Berkeley. And I've loved it. It's been one of the highlights of my time at Berkeley. And so I definitely recommend applying. Okay, and so just to get into what the course content will look like. So we'll start off the first few lectures with just a high level overview, and we'll get into some of the history and like motivations for blockchain and crypto. And then we'll get into how it's worked, how it's used, and how it's abused. So, and then of course, we will expand our horizon past just Bitcoin. And so we can get a conceptual understanding of distributed systems, and then Ethereum, and understanding the difference between Ethereum and blockchain, and then other different tokens or currencies, and then understanding some of the barriers to adoption and why it isn't used everywhere today, and how we can adjust scalability and like what kind of the current situation is in that regard. And then we'll have a guest lecture on DeFi, which is decentralized finance, from the Xcelerator team. And that'll be one of our lectures coming up. And then just in terms of Zoom etiquette, so if you're not talking or if you're not asking a question, please keep yourself muted. That'd be great. And then while we're presenting, if you can put your questions in the chat, that would be phenomenal. But feel free to unmute yourself when we pause for questions. So you'll see like a big question slide. And when we pause too, feel free to get a little stretch break, do whatever you need to do. It's a long class and there's a lot that's gonna be thrown at you. So feel free to like just take some time during these question breaks. And then if you can, to have your cameras on, just so it feels like we can actually get to meet you and get to know you. So that would be fantastic. So our first question break. Does anyone have any questions about anything I went over so far? I'll look at the chat to see if there's anything as well.
Yeah, so there were a couple of questions about enrollment codes. I'll just answer them out loud. We're going to send out B course invitations and enrollment codes after this lecture, so this weekend. And we will have an attendance quiz at the end of this lecture. So that's how we'll count your participation. And if you don't want to take this class for units, or you're just auditing it, then you don't need to take those quizzes, but you're welcome to join.
Yeah, and we understand that there's a lot going on people are all across the world. It's such a wacky semester. And so if you have to get up at 4 a.m. for this class, we by no means do not want you to have to do that. And so of course, everything's recorded for your convenience so that you can watch it when works best for you. But in terms of attendance and lecture quizzes, those will be released right after lecture and then due about 24 hours after. So most likely around like Friday at midnight or at 6 p.m. We're still gonna figure out how long it takes to actually submit this video to B courses, like the lecture recording. So be sure it's very important to watch it in a timely manner so you can fill out the quizzes.
And our syllabus will be on our B courses page.
And then a question about auditing. Yes, you don't have to take it for units. Okay, great. Course code, syllabus. Any other questions from anyone, or should we?
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Okay.
Awesome. So what is Bitcoin? Let's dive right into the content. This is probably a question a lot of you want answered if you haven't already answered it yourself. And so just a brief structure of this course, we'll kind of start off going over Bitcoin and Bitcoin structure, and then we'll expand the technology behind Bitcoin into other cases of where blockchain technology can be used. So just at a high level, these are two terms that you've definitely heard thrown around this space a lot. And so before we start off, we kind of want to give concrete definitions to them. And this is what we think that cryptocurrency and blockchains are. We encourage you to develop your own definitions for these, as you learn more about the space. But just as a starting point, a cryptocurrency is a form of currency that's stored completely digitally. So there's no physical counterpart to it, and it's not tangible. It's not something that you can hold in your hands, and it isn't issued by a central authority. So there's no central bank, there's no Fed that's issuing monetary policy, right? It's a standalone thing. And so if there's no bank that's regulating it, then how do we ensure the integrity of a cryptocurrency? I'm sure that's what you're thinking. And so cryptocurrencies are secured using, and these words are big, and do not worry if you don't know what they mean, because that's the whole point of this class. They're made secure with cryptography, distributed consensus, and economic incentive alignment. And so we'll get into these later on in this lecture and throughout this entire class. But for now, you can think of cryptography as some pretty complicated math that is used to secure sensitive information. And so we use that a lot with Bitcoin and in blockchain. And distributed consensus is how we get, instead of using like a central authority, we distribute that consensus among the entire system. And then economic incentive alignment has a lot to do with game theory. And so you'll see that a lot of the rules involved with cryptocurrencies and other blockchain technologies invoke game theory in order to align incentives and make the entire system run smoothly. And so just a quick example, Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a type of cryptocurrency. And so stepping aside from cryptocurrency for a second, what is a blockchain? A blockchain is a data structure that is used to represent a cryptocurrency. And so if you're not a CS person like me, you can think about data structures as databases. And so a blockchain is kind of a complicated database, but at its core, it's a place where you store data. And it's this data structure, it's this blockchain that cryptocurrencies are built upon. And blockchains are able to store data in a way that allows multiple parties to come together, look at that data, access it reliably without having to trust one another. And this is a pretty big issue when you really think about the mechanics of storing data and how you can share that data with other people. So it's a pretty large feat that blockchain is able to overcome in order to get people to access the same data without having to lie trust in the other person. And so if we're saying that we can make a digital currency, then we kind of have to back that claim up and talk about the key characteristics of a currency. Like, can we get all of this into like a digital currency? So we'll go through these. The first one being durability. This just means if I have a dollar, like that dollar needs to continue to be a dollar. It can't just lose value from one day to the next. And it should be, pretty sustainable. It can't just be destroyed pretty easily. And then portability, which means that the currency can be easily transported. So if I'm home right now and I want to go get a coffee from Strata, I want to be able to take my dollar bill with me. If I can't move it around with me and transport it, then it's not really of any use to me. Divisibility just means that you can't do all your transactions using $100 bills. So we have 50s, 10s, 20s, quarters. It's just different denominations, of that currency. Uniformity, this is also sometimes called fungibility, and it just means that you shouldn't be able to distinguish value between units of the same currency. So there's no $1 bill is going to be worth more than another dollar bill. Limited supply, so you shouldn't be able to just arbitrarily inflate the supply of your currency. There should be some sort of mechanics behind it. A pretty simple example is, let's say I'm a cow breeder and I'm using cows as my currency. They have some intrinsic value to them. Then I could just artificially inflate the supply of that currency, and that'll just mess with the value. And so you need to make sure that whatever currency you're using has a limited supply. And then acceptability, pretty straightforward. You need to make sure that other people will accept the currency that you're using, or else it's not going to really be of much use to you either. And so far we've talked about the currency part of a cryptocurrency, but now we're going to get into that crypto part. We've talked about a blockchain, but what are the key characteristics of that blockchain? And like I said, this is not an easy concept. These three terms are definitely going to be like, whoa, what does that mean? But that is the whole point of this class. So in the next 10 lectures, we'll go through each and every one of these a couple of times. But just as you know, a first introduction to it, we think the first thing that's a key characteristic of a blockchain is decentralized control. And so this just means that instead of one party making the decision and one central entity being able to control who has access to it, it's a community, and everyone has to be able to come to a consensus in order to access or update the blockchain. So comparing this to, a normal database that we imagine, like let's say Facebook, if Facebook wants to update their database, they can do that because they own that database. It's in one place and it has one owner. But in a blockchain, right, this is supposed to be a distributed database. So it's supposed to be amongst a lot of people. And so there needs to be this decentralized control aspect of it. And the second one is tamper evidence. So it needs to become immediately obvious if data stored on the blockchain has been tampered with. And so this just means that if someone changes something on the blockchain, tampers with something that's been already there, or kind of acts in a malicious way, everyone else will be immediately able to see that. And I want to make a note here that this is not tamper proof. This does not mean that if someone acts maliciously on the blockchain, that, the system is just going to immediately eradicate that mistake. It's not. That's not how blockchains work, but it will become evident. So people will be able to see that it's been messed with, and they'll be able to act in such a way to sidestep that mistake. And so this last thing is Nakamoto consensus. That's something that we call this. And so this is, I think, the most abstract of these three. But let's say, compare back to Facebook. If you want to make an account on Facebook, you kind of have to say, hey, I'm a real person, like, here's my email address. Facebook will look at your email address, say, oh yeah, this checks out, like this is real, and they'll give you your account. And so on a blockchain, you have to prove, like the same way that you need to prove with your email address, you have to provably spend resources when you want to update the blockchain. And we have a whole lecture on Nakamoto consensus, but this is just a first introduction to what that is. Sorry. Okay, so I've kind of thrown around centralization, decentralization, and we need to put that to definitions to actually make sure we're all on the same page. So centralization is when authorization is handled by a single party, and this is all around us. There's no shortage of examples to use here, but at a high level, this just means that data is stored by a single party. So that Facebook example, they store all of their own data. They have access to all their own data. If I ask to, update my profile picture, I get to ask Facebook and they allow me to do that, right? But I never get to actually tangibly interact with that database because that's theirs. And so there's a bunch of different examples of this in a client server network. Let's say I want to build a website. So I reach out to this server who offers websites. I'm interacting with their server and they give me a website, but my data is being stored by them. And you can think of a hierarchical organization chart. So right here on the bottom, these people, no matter how many people there are in the system, it all kind of bubbles up to this figurehead at the top who gets to determine who has access to what the rules are, what the limitations are. And the people on the bottom don't really have a lot of say in what goes on in the system. You can think of it like a political dynasty, like a monarchy where they get the last word. Banks are a big one. We'll come back to that later on. But they kind of do all the behind the scenes work that you never get access to. Figureheads, these are all the things that should come into your mind when you think of centralization. And so what are some of the pros and cons? There are definitely some pros, definitely some cons. The biggest pro is definitely efficiency. When data is stored in one place, everything gets executed once. You don't have to do it multiple times. So when Facebook wants to, when you want to update your profile photo on Facebook, that only happens one time, right? You send it to them and they send it to you. That doesn't need to go through multiple levels of updating. So it's much more efficient. It can happen much more quickly. And so these pros and cons are also like in terms of blockchain, like we're kind of thinking in those terms. And two, it's super easy to update. If Facebook wants to update their entire software, that just needs to get the stamp of approval from internally, and they're able to push that update onto users, right? We've all seen that notification. You can't use Facebook unless you get the newest update. And so you have no choice but to update if you want to continue to use that service. And so it's really easy for us and it's really easy for them because they just need to do it one time and everyone has to get that update now. Some of the cons, though, is this lack of sovereignty. So like I said, when I submit a request to do something in my account on Facebook, I never actually interact with the data itself. That's being stored by them. And so that's something that I give up for this efficiency, is this lack of sovereignty. So that central party, there are laws in place to prevent this, but they can choose to use my data arbitrarily. And what we've seen is that they have. So Facebook has sold our data to advertisers and whomever else. And so what we've seen is that this data can be used in malicious ways, in ways that we don't necessarily know about. And two, there's one point of failure. So if someone wants to hack into, I don't know why I'm using Facebook, but I guess I'll continue. If someone wants to hack into Facebook's database, that's all stored in one place, one central server. So there's only one place where they would need to attack. And obviously there's like security measures like up the wazoo for Facebook for what they have in place. But it's always possible because there's only one point of failure, and it's their central database. And so what's the other side of that coin? And it's decentralization. And this is the exact opposite. So this is, instead of authorization according to a single party, it's authorization according to an openly known protocol. And so it's very public. Everyone knows what the protocol is. And everyone involved in the community has to okay that authorization. There's no single authority above anyone else. Everyone is on the same exact plane. And the data is stored by everyone who wants to access it. Everyone on the blockchain stores that data. So all the participants who are on, you can kind of think of them like all in one line, they're all in the same place and they're all storing that data. And so think peer-to-peer networking, a flat organization chart where there's no one above anyone else. Everyone's just purely peers. A very pure democracy where everyone's voice gets heard the same amount. No one gets to speak over anyone else. Everyone votes and everyone's vote counts. A barter economy and a community. So there's a huge community basis to blockchain. Yeah, and we can go to the pros and cons. Awesome. So the pros, it's like exactly flipped, right? So the pros are that this increased sovereignty. You know exactly how your data is being used. You know exactly where your data is. You get to choose what data you want to put onto the blockchain, and you know that it's being secured. And it's fault tolerant. So because we have this distributed aspect of blockchains, there's not a single point of failure like with Facebook's database, right? That one person needs to hack into it and access all that data. You need to hack into every single distributed person in the blockchain, which is going to take a lot of work. So it's very fault tolerant. So the whole network would have to be taken down instead of just a single party. But then there are a lot of cons, right? Like this is way less efficient because data has to be duplicated across every single person. Programs are re-executed and it can be very repetitive across the entire network to ensure the integrity of that data. This is like the process that we have to go through. So every single person has to maintain the same exact data. And we'll get into exactly why that is later on in this lecture. And the second con is that it's difficult to update because every single person, again, needs to update it in order for the update to go through for the entire network. So updates must be deliberately adopted by participants in the network. So instead of Facebook just pushing that update onto all of its users, each of its users would have to agree to that update in order for it to be adopted. And so I've kind of talked about like these abstract concepts, centralization, decentralization, Nakamoto consensus, but what is Bitcoin? And so Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency that was created by Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008. Satoshi Nakamoto is an alias, as I'm sure many of you have heard. It's an anonymous person. We have no idea who actually created Bitcoin, which adds, it's Craig, guys. We just found out. It adds to the mystery behind it, right? Behind why Bitcoin is so intriguing. And so even though it was a cryptocurrency, it wasn't the first cryptocurrency. And the reason why Bitcoin is kind of at the forefront of this cryptocurrency movement to a lot of us is because it was the original use of blockchain. So it was the first time the blockchain had ever been used, and now it's being used for all kinds of stuff like supply chains and other things. But it's Bitcoin was the original use of blockchain. And so what was so cool about it was that it was this purely digital form of currency that was actually usable and that wasn't controlled by any central entity. And so this person, whoever they are, came up with a way to solve this issue of needing a third party in order to execute transactions and have trust in those transactions, right? So blockchain solves the issue. It says you actually don't need to trust anyone, and you don't need a third party to like be in the middle of all your transactions. You can do that. You can create this channel between you and the person that you want to send or receive money to. And we'll get into exactly how that works again later in lecture. But kind of like as I've been talking, you probably picked up on some undertones of humanitarianism or democracy or this striving for increased rights, right? And if you picked up on that, you're 100% right. This has been motivated by the cypherpunk movement, which was kind of fighting for more data privacy in an increasingly digital world. They kind of realized that our data was going to be used against us if we didn't actively fight for it. And so this is something that's so important nowadays. We don't even realize when our data is being used against us. And sometimes we get lucky and we find out, like with Facebook, but we have no idea like what Google's doing, what Amazon's doing, what all these companies are doing. So it's super important, especially now, for us to understand that we have the right to our own data and self-governance. And so this is all done through cryptography. And so there's also a lot of bank hating in this talk, like with Bitcoin. The whole reason Bitcoin came to be, and the 2008 wasn't a coincidence. Like 2008, a lot of people realized that we can't trust banks as much as we thought we could. We trust banks with transferring and redeeming money, accurately recording account history, and storing our personal information. In 2008, we realized that we actually can't trust banks all the time with redeeming money. Sometimes like they literally run out and they can't give it to us. And so they're not as infallible, I think, as some people may have thought before then. And so Bitcoin came at this turning point, and this happened in the Great Depression too. And so it came at this turning point where a lot of people wanted to see, could we actually do the same things that banks do, but put it into a decentralized system? So we don't necessarily need to trust those banks because they really are just a third party that has been profiting off of, everyone just living life for a really long time. And so we'll get into how do we make a decentralized system do everything that a bank does now. And so this is going to be the remainder of the lecture. We're going to get into the four main components of Bitcoin as we see it. So this first one is identity. Who are you in the system? How do you act? Do people know who you are? Are you really anonymous? What does anonymous even mean? And how you make an account in the system. And then we'll get into transactions, which is how you actually send and receive Bitcoin, how you sign those transactions, how do you know that they really belong to you? And then we'll get into the distributed ledger, which is the recorded transaction history. And so that takes the role of the bank instead of the slide before when I talk about, how we trust banks with recording all of our transactions. We'll see how we can actually do that ourselves and how we can do that using a distributed ledger. And the last thing we'll get into is trustless consensus. And this is about like updates to the system and changing the system and how we have to agree as a community on changes made to that distributed ledger. Whew. Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I'll take a look through.
A ton of information.
I'll scan through the chat here.
All right. Yes, because it's trustless and immutable. This is true. That is why.
I had a question.
Yes.
So when you say you need a consensus to like validate any transaction, is that more than 50% or is that like every single node needs to agree?
So it's
sorry.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, I was scanning through the chat.
Yeah. So I think consensus was mentioned. So I was wondering, is that like like a democracy where it's like more than 50%, or does it have to be like every single node has to agree and validate that transaction?
Yeah, so we'll get into some more protocols later on, but at least for blockchain or for Bitcoin's network, they use 50%. And so we'll get into consensus more and it'll all make more sense. But it's not quite as clear cut as just 50% for voting. So sorry, that's like one of the most complex parts of blockchain is the consensus mechanism. So
Yeah, we have a whole, I think it's lecture 6, all about consensus protocols.
yeah, that brings up a great point though. So thank you for asking about that. Okay. Any other question?
Yeah. Oh, you know about the 51% attack. Yeah, we have a whole lecture on game theory and attacks too. That's a really fun lecture.
Okay.
And yeah, so we can move on to the next part.
Okay, well, we'll get on into it. So now I'll be just talking a little bit about identity. And so at least in common forms now, the way we use the idea of an identity is like, if I ask you for identity, you probably think I mean like your driver's license, passport, student ID, or really any of these things. And at least in the blockchain world, the way we talk about identity is just something that can be used to connect me as an individual or anyone as an individual and identify them. And so the way we do this is through like a serial code, or like which you can think of as like kind of like a serial code, but we will explain how this is used. And so at least in context of crypto and in currencies in general, there are 3 main rules for an identity, and for a reason we need one. And so for starters, we need an identity so we can receive money. Like if I have $10, I want to give them to someone, but I don't know who I'm going to give them to, then it's really difficult for me to spend these $5 and actually give them to the right person. And so having an identity that is unique and very clear and accessible is important to proper money transfer. And on the other side of that, we see claiming and spending money. And so if I want to actually claim my money that someone gives me, I need to be able to verify that I'm actually the person who is the intended recipient of this money. And finally, just in terms of blame, because blockchain and like blockchain itself is run by a bunch of different people in a giant network of nodes or devices, if someone acts up and does something wrong, we need to be able to identify who is acting maliciously and who we need to either remove from the network, or we need to create some kind of disciplinary action. And so in terms of like identity in Bitcoin, the way we can think about it as I think of it as there being like 2 different components to it. And so for starters, we have something called like the public key and the private key here. And so just for like a little analogy, so just as like if I want to think of like someone's house, so I can find their address and be able to pinpoint exactly where they live. Okay, I can go on Google Maps and find their address, and then when I pull up to their house, I know exactly where it is. I can tell that's my friend's house or whoever it is. And so that is public and open to everyone. On the other side of that, we have like mailbox keys. So in terms of mailbox or like a mailbox key, anyone can put mail inside or visit, but only one person, and like the person who has the mailbox key, can actually remove their mail and like read through it and go from there. And so similarly, like with an email, we have like a username and a password. Like the username or like the alias, or maybe like the domain name, whatever it may be, I know exactly that. Like Ava's email is avapayment@berkeley.edu, and anyone can email Ava, or you can email me, Nate Pohl at Berkeley, if you have any questions. But as that is open and public to everyone, our passwords are private. And so we have this duality of like a public key and a private key. And we need both of these to be able to interact with our cryptocurrency so that we can receive money, spend money, and then be responsible if we do, or be held responsible if we do act maliciously. And so I guess to get a little more to public and private keys, I know I talked about it a lot back then. So the corresponding private key acts as like the key to unlock the public key. And so like we do need both of these to actually receive your money or interact with your money. And so I guess just to reiterate, so a unique private key is generated randomly, and the public key is derived from the private key. And so what this means is the public key, we can always use our private key to connect to our public key, but our public key can never be traced back to our private key. And this ensures, in the same way that my email can't be traced back to my password, I know that my private key will be held safe and I will be the only one who is able to use it. And so a few things to note right here. So does no personal information is required. So does that mean Bitcoin is anonymous? And the answer to that is actually no. If something were fully anonymous, it would mean that there'd be no way to connect me with however I interact with the blockchain network. But because we do have this public key, this means that it is pseudonymous. And instead, there is like a serial code or some way to identify me, but it doesn't relate at all to my personal identity of being Nate Pola. And now there's no limit on how many accounts you can make. That's a common question that comes up. And the question is like, the fact that there is no limit to the number of accounts you can make, does this affect the security of Bitcoin? Well, you think naturally, yes, if someone can make a ton of accounts, then they can just rule the network. But there are like, the consensus mechanism that we'll talk about later prevents this from happening. And so it'll all make sense later on. So it's just a little foreshadowing for later today. And then there's also no restriction on keys that have been taken. And so does this mean that someone can have the same private key as me? And we'll get into why this isn't the case. And so just throughout the course, just so you know, sometimes we'll have some slides that are like black slides, and these are highly technical in nature. And so if there are things on here that maybe are a little confusing to you, that's totally fine. They're confusing to most people. And so no need to worry too much. And so at least with Bitcoin, if you want to think about the number of private keys that exist, there are 2 raised to the 160 powers. So I'm not even going to try to say this number. Bonus points if you can figure out how to say this and put it in the Q&A or something later on. But this is the number of possible addresses out there. And so it really is practically impossible for any 1 or 2 people to overlap using random generations of public keys. And so just to put this into perspective, as of like September 2020, the population of the world was 7.8 billion. And so if everyone tried if we wanted to even span this number of addresses and of public keys, then every person would have to take like 2 raised to the 126th power all to themselves. And so imagine every human being trying to do this, and still that is how we get overlap. And so it really is it's practically impossible for this to occur. Okay, that was a lot. Does anyone have any questions about anything I went over? I'll check the chat.
Can you repeat why it's impossible for 2 people to have the same? I didn't understand your last explanation.
Oh yeah. So just because the fact that there's so many addresses out there, and like to actually generate, if you were to try to like kind of crack Bitcoin's algorithm, you'd have to generate this many different possible addresses. And so each person would have to do this like an infeasible number of times. And so the fact that there are so many addresses out there makes it virtually impossible to crack the code of blockchain or Bitcoin.
That was a good distinction, because it's not impossible. Technically, it's not impossible, but it's so not probable that it's basically impossible. Is your identity your public key? Yes. So that's why it's pseudonymous, not anonymous, because you still do have an identity in Bitcoin. It's just not your real life identity. It's not your name.
Can you guys kind of explain what a private key looks like? It's just a random set of numbers and letters, or what is it then?
Yeah, so it could actually come in a lot of different forms. So in terms of people it actually varies. So there are companies like Coinbase or places that will, like you can interact with these different platforms and like a lot of times can be like a code or a password, really whatever you want it to be. And then there are like different types of wallets, which are pretty much ways to store your public and private keys. And this is like what stores just like a wallet stores cash, like you have, a like Bitcoin or blockchain wallet stores your crypto. And so in terms of like your private key, that can vary from being anything from like some kind of serial code. It could be either like a USB flash drive or some kind of external hard drive. And so there are a bunch of different forms depending on how safe you want to be. And so like we'll get into this in a future lecture, but that was definitely a great question. Cool. Yeah, a lot of good questions today.
Yeah, it's a series of letters and numbers.
Okay, let's see. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question. Does that give them any like power as like a centralized entity? Like Coinbase specifically? Does it like if they're the provider of a wallet?
That's a good question.
It does not, because they don't have access. Sorry, Ava, go ahead.
I was gonna say that's like an important question to ask.
Yeah, and so it doesn't. It does not, because Coinbase or whatever the entity is just like it just facilitates the process. It doesn't actually have access to your private key, and so all it does is puts people in touch and helps with the conversion between like fiat currencies like dollars, euros, francs to different cryptocurrencies.
Yeah. So Coinbase doesn't. Yeah, you just answered it. So I'm not gonna.
Okay, what are some of the top websites to purchase crypto? You can go through Coinbase, but you get charged. Yeah. So, yeah, great question, Andrew. So, in terms of websites, there are a lot of different ones. A lot of what it varies on is accessibility, and so people who are new to buying crypto will use Coinbase. I actually have a different presentation I made for a different group. I can share that with you just on different ways that will either it might limit the cryptocurrencies that you can interact with, but it does provide lower fees and it assumes some more experience background. And so from what it sounds like, you have purchased some crypto before. And so I can send some of those to you after if you just send me an email or we can interact there.
Thanks.
No problem.
Royland, Nate and I wrote an article about that exact question last semester. So we can share that with you if you want. How the value of cryptocurrency is determined. So I think we can move on. Does anyone have any more questions quickly?
Okay, well.
For the ledger question, I'm in 2 sections. I'm going to go into the distributed ledger. Hopefully I'll be able to answer your question then. Cool, awesome. So I'm going to get into some transactions and just basically how transactions work in Bitcoin, who sends it, who receives it, how does it work, what does it look like at a high level. We'll get into like the actual like mechanics of transactions in another lecture. Next slide. No, you're good. And so the leading question for this section is going to be what makes a transaction valid? And this is interesting because we've never really had to think about this before because banks kind of take care of that for us. We've never had to consider what goes into the process of validating a transaction because we've just kind of placed all that trust into banks. But now we kind of want to think, okay, if we're going to try to create something that does everything that banks do, we have to get into that mindset and think about what goes on behind the scenes. And so these are the 3 main things that we think make a transaction valid. Firstly, you need proof of ownership. You have to prove that the money you're about to send actually belongs to you. You need available funds. You need to make sure that you actually have that money that you want to send. And then this last one's a little wonky, but you need to make sure that no other transactions are using those same funds that you're trying to send. And so if we go into the traditional model of an account, thank you. So this is how we think about it. Like there's a central manager, a program usually that will keep track of the account balances between 2 people and verify that those transactions are valid. They'll verify that Alice owns that money. They'll verify that Alice has the available funds to send that. And they will subtract when you spend and they'll add when you receive. And so it's pretty basic. And so in this model, it makes sense. Like, well, you don't need to make sure that those funds aren't being used anywhere else because it's just being subtracted from the balance. And so once it's subtracted, it's gone. But, you know, Bitcoin does something a little differently where they actually track each unit of Bitcoin. Whereas here we're looking at balance sheets kind of, Bitcoin looks at the individual units. So instead of me like sending $50 to Nate, it would be more like I used these $51 bills. And yeah, like maybe I had those at some point, but we need to make sure that those $51 bills weren't used anywhere else when I try to send those to Nate. And so that becomes a little bit of a problem when you get into Bitcoin. But when we talk about transactions with Bitcoin, they use the UTXO model. UTXO stands for unspent transaction outputs. And every Bitcoin account holds a set of UTXOs, which are just quantities of Bitcoin that have been sent to that account that have not been redeemed yet. And these UTXOs can contain any quantity of Bitcoin. But once they're spent, you have to spend everything that's inside of it. And so I think it's really helpful to think of these as piggy banks. So let's say I have a piggy bank that has 3 Bitcoin in it. And if you want to access what's in that piggy bank, you have to break it open. You just have to destroy the entire Bitcoin, the bank. the piggy bank. And so once it's destroyed, you can't put it back together again and use it. It's destroyed. It's gone forever. So it's the same thing with Bitcoin. And so now I'm holding 3 Bitcoin in my hand, and I want to pay one of those to Nate. I want to pay 0.5 of that to my tutor, let's say, but I want to keep 1.5 for myself. But I had to break open the whole piggy bank to use that right now, right? I had to break open the whole 3 Bitcoin. So what do I do with that 1.5 that's left over that I want for myself? I can actually reroute that and I can send it back to myself. But I just created 3 new piggy banks. So I just sent 1 piggy bank to Nate. And so that's now his UTXO. I've sent 0.5 to my tutor, and I've sent 1.5 back to myself. And so this kind of elucidates the idea that it has to be spent in its entirety, and it can also only be redeemed once. So the second you open up that UTXO, it's like that UTXO is gone. Like you need to create new UTXOs now, and you can send it in it's an expensive tutor. And so you can spend those UTXOs, you can send it to new people, or you can send it back to yourself. And so in the next slide, we'll kind of go over that in a little more detail. So let's say Alice wants to use 2 of her UTXOs, one with 1 Bitcoin and one with 1.2 Bitcoin. It's actually kind of funny. So this slide used to say, hey, Alice, you still owe me 2 Bitcoin for that coffee last week. Back when 2 Bitcoin actually bought you a coffee. But now we change it to Tesla because that's upwards of $70,000 now. And so, hey, Alice, you still owe me 2 Bitcoin for that Tesla last week. So Alice like, okay. She puts in her 1 Bitcoin UTXO and her 1.2 Bitcoin UTXO. And so we can, wait, I'm actually going to see, I'm going to annotate right now. So we can like say that this is piggy bank 1 and this is piggy bank 2. So once they go into that transaction, they're like destroyed. So those piggy bank 1 and piggy bank 2, they're gone now. And so Alice creates a new, she's kind of writing this down. She's like, okay, I want to send 2 Bitcoin to Bob. And this becomes UTXO 3. And so she creates a new UTXO here. And then, but there's still 0.2 left over that you can see. And so then what she's going to say, and that 0.2 that's left over, I want to send that back to myself. And so this is going to be piggy bank number 4. And so the same thing, like that same process is going to continue. If Bob wants to spend those 2 Bitcoin, he has to open up the UTXO in its entirety and then send that out or send it back to himself, depending on what he's trying to do there. So that's a UTXO model. So Bitcoin uses. And so we can kind of see how this contributes to the validity of transactions. Proof of ownership is done by your signature on that transaction, and that signature is generated by your private key. And you can think about private keys like your thumbprint. It's so unique. It's just like it works like a thumbprint. And so you put that on your transaction and you say, this is mine because this is my private key and no one else has my private key. And so this must be mine. And so when that transaction is sent, you're proving that you owned those UTXOs, or you own those UTXOs and you want to send them out now. And then you can prove that you have available funds because those UTXOs, like we just saw on the slide before, those are inputted directly into the transaction. So if the sum on the left is less than the sum on the right, the transaction won't go through because you don't have the available funds to go through that transaction. And this last one, how do you prove that those UTXOs are only being used in this transaction and no other transactions? You can kind of see how that would work because the UTXOs are destroyed immediately after they're opened up, but we'll get into that more in a later lecture too, the exact mechanism that goes into that. Cool. So do you guys have any questions on transactions?
I know Andrew had his hand up. So
Yeah.
Oh,
I had a quick question. Like, I imagine like, let's say I was like looking to buy like a Bitcoin from a friend, and he's like, oh, I have it on like a private key. It's like a little flash drive. How do you go about like testing that flash drive to make sure it actually has like 1 Bitcoin, if that makes sense?
So if your friend wanted to send you a Bitcoin, they wouldn't like, I actually, that's not really like the traditional way of sending and receiving Bitcoin isn't like exchanging private keys. They would just actually send it to your public key address. So if your friend wanted to send you Bitcoin, you'd say, all right, cool, like here's my address, because that's like the way that you would make sure that your friend actually does have the Bitcoin that they say. Because the system would take care of it. I'm trying to think if you could ensure that that private key was really attached to that public key, and I'm sure there's a way that you could. But traditionally, like, yeah, you wouldn't give someone else your private key. That's something that you want to keep to yourself always.
Okay, yeah, because I was just like thinking, like, I know with the IRS trying to keep track of like who's getting Bitcoins and stuff, and I was trying to think of like a way that like a friend has like 100 Bitcoins. Could like I just go to him and be like, oh, here's 30,000. Could I have one of your coins? And like he uploads one to like a flash drive, and then like it's like kind of like black market, like under the radar in a sense.
Totally.
So if anything, something that we'll talk about later is because you can make multiple identities and it's practically free, there could be a way to send it to a different, like, I guess, flash drive or private key. So that, and I guess we'll think of it as like a wallet. So if you send it from one wallet to this other wallet, I don't know, like, I guess like a burner wallet or some kind of something you'd want to be able to trade with someone else. It's funny because it does sound like a drug trade type situation, like people transacting like this, but typically it's all done through just exchanging addresses and sending it there. That's a great question though. Let's see. Yeah, you never want to give your private key to anyone. That is very true.
And I'm sure also using that, if he gives you his private key, you can just try to spend the Bitcoin, and in spending it, just send it back to yourself and see if it works. I don't know if I should be contributing to black markets, but yeah, I think that would work. Cool. So if there are no more questions, we'll get into.
I have a question. So basically, so can a UTXO have negative values? Like I spend more than I have, those type of situation?
So it cannot, and just the reason for this is because it's so that like UTXO stands for like unspent transaction output, and so if you don't have, like, it's everything that is unspent isn't, actually that's a bad way to put it. Pretty much you can only spend things that are unspent, and because of this, like the network will instantly know, and this is due to like our broadcasting transaction factor, which we'll talk about in a bit, but the network will know if you don't have any Bitcoin to spend, and so if you don't, they won't let you make any transactions or spend something that doesn't exist. And so that's one of the key parts, is you can't go in debt in Bitcoin because that can be problematic too. And so that's, yeah, one of the really clever parts of Bitcoin. Okay. Right, so Oliver, do you want to get into distributed ledger?
Yes, I want to answer this quick question. I'll just answer it out loud. So breaking the piggy bank won't change your private key, because your private key is attached to your public key address. So that's kind of just like your identity in Bitcoin, and that won't change. You can always create new ones, but it won't change once you've created it. And so breaking the piggy bank, like Ryder said, is just like you're redeeming the UTXO. So you're sending that UTXO to someone else, or you're sending it back to yourself. And so then that original UTXO is destroyed. Cool. So let's get into distributed ledger. So this is, I think, for me, this was like the most key concept with blockchain. And this is kind of how it's able to keep records and become so usable as a financial service in Bitcoin. So let's think about what the traditional model of keeping a record is. So we can think of data being stored and updated by one central entity, like a bank. We can think about this like a bank. And so if Alice wants to send $3 to Bob, she has to ask the bank, can I send $3 to Bob? The bank will say, okay, yeah, sure, I'll let you. And the bank will then send those $3 to Bob. And so this is super convenient, because if Alice doesn't know Bob will follow through on something, the bank will kind of ensure that, it's kind of like an inbuilt contract in that sense. And so it's a third party that both Alice and Bob trust without necessarily trusting each other. And so the bank will have security measures in place to prevent hackers and failures. But what Satoshi Nakamoto saw, I'm going to annotate again because that was cool. And what we see now is that there's not really a need for this person in the middle. Why not just create an open channel between Alice and Bob? if you can come up with the technology for it, that's definitely preferable, because we're just, like we said, like we're putting so much trust into the central party when we actually don't really need to. And so in the blockchain model for record keeping, they use something called distributed ledger. And this is like, does anyone want to volunteer in the chat to be in my example? You can just say me.
Me.
Sure.
Yay. Okay. Philomena. Philomena, Chunks, John, Ryder, and I, and Nate. We all go to dinner every Friday. For like, this is our tradition, right? Like every Friday we're all going out to dinner. And it becomes kind of cumbersome to constantly split up the bill at dinner every Friday. So we're like, okay, why don't we just assign John? We'll say, John, can you keep track of who pays for dinner on a given Friday night? And then at the end of the month, at the end of a couple months or like a year, we'll split it up evenly. And so that'll just reduce the amount of time it takes. And then we start to realize, Philomena and I are like, have you noticed like John has been paying as much ever since we put him in charge of keeping the ledger? Like we're paying more, but we're all eating the same. And so we start to think that maybe he's messing, sorry, John, maybe he's messing with the ledger that he's keeping on his phone, right? And so we propose, we're like, okay, instead of John keeping the entire record of our dinners, why don't me, Philomena, John, Chunks, Ryder, and Nate, we're all gonna open up the notes app on our phone and we're gonna say Friday night dinners, and we're gonna start keeping track of everything that gets spent every Friday night. And so this way, next time John tries to mess with the prices, we'll say, well, all of our phones have this price listed and yours is just a little bit less. So we think that you messed with something. And so that way we can, oh, the recording is paused, by the way. I just noticed that.
Is it still on? Okay.
That's what it says for me.
It says recording on mine.
Okay, cool.
Okay, yeah, it says recording.
Okay, so maybe it's just mine.
Okay.
Maybe. Okay, sorry about that. I just got scared for a second. And so once we figure out this way for each of us, can you go back one?
Yeah.
And great. And so once we find out a way for each of us to keep this record on our phones, we're able to tell if anyone messes with it. And so this is kind of where the tamper evidence aspect of blockchain comes in. And so in a blockchain, data is stored by and updates are broadcasted to everyone. So we all get to keep the data and we all get to decide if we want to update that data. And so, sorry, back one more time. And so this is transparent and fault tolerant by design. That's what I just said. It becomes very obvious if someone messed with the system. Okay, sorry, now you can go forward. And so you might be wondering, how exactly are these transactions stored on the blockchain? And you may think like, oh, each individual transaction becomes its own block, or maybe it gets stored by itself. But what actually happens is, if that were to be the case, every single person interacting with that blockchain would have to update every single time a transaction occurred. And so you can imagine this is super time consuming, super repetitive. And so what ends up happening is that we bundle these transactions into blocks, and that's where the block in blockchain comes from, with backlinks to enforce an ordering. So each block references the block before it and the block before it and the block before it. And this is just to ensure that we have valid transactions happening, that we're operating on the most up-to-date chain, a valid chain. And so this enforces an ordering within the blockchain. Awesome. So that was distributed ledger. I know you guys had some questions about that. So go ahead, raise your hand, unmute. I'll look in the chat right now.
Can you explain one more time how the transactions are stored in blocks? And yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So the transactions, without getting too into the nitty gritty, they basically get broadcast to everyone in the network. And then once somebody has a new block that they want to add to the blockchain, they say, okay, I'll just grab these transactions that were just sent to me. We'll bundle them all together and we'll make sure that they're valid. And then once we add them into the block, then that person will then broadcast that new block to everyone else and say, hey, look at this, I found a block that contains these transactions in it. And that's kind of how the blockchain gets added onto. is that these people continue to find blocks, and then every time someone finds a block, they put new transactions into it. And there's like a bunch of stuff with like how blocks are created, how you add a block onto the chain, and that'll be like really, really covered in detail in future lectures. But just for now, you can just know that this system is how you maintain the integrity of those blocks. And then those blocks get broadcast to the rest of the network.
Gotcha, thanks.
Of course.
I see another hand.
Yes.
Another question now.
Hiromitsu, go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to ask.
Yeah. So what exactly the block is? Like, what is it block? Like, is that like a group of people, like network, or is it like I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah. So so for now you can think of a block as just like a bundle of information. And so it has a few things that involve, has like a title, but more importantly, it has like a list of transactions that dictate like how like Bitcoin goes from whom to who. And so it is, yeah, it has your transactions exactly. And it has like other information pointing towards like what chain it belongs to. And we'll get into more of that later. But just think of each block as like a piece of information or a list of transactions.
Is that something like we can just easily make, or is it
Yeah,
it more flexible?
Totally.
Nice.
And so even in different types of like non-crypto examples or like non-crypto use cases of blockchain, blocks can be generated like at whatever rate the network decides. So they're pretty flexible. It's more just like the actual like acquiring a Bitcoin, which is, or at least in Bitcoin, acquiring like an actual Bitcoin token is what is like the part that has cash value and can be cashed out for like $41,000 or whatever it is today.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
If you have any, I know this is a problematic analogy, but if you have any coding experience, I know that blockchains have been compared to linked lists. So you can kind of consider that as the data structure that we're using here. It's definitely different, but as a baseline for like jumping off and thinking of this as a concept, you can think of it as something that refers to what came before it and stores data. Yes, Philomena, I see your hand up.
Yes, just to go back to like the little dinner analogy. So if Nate and John were going dinner, like within my block, their transaction is in it, or is it my blocks only contain my transactions?
Sorry, I was muted. So blocks kind of open up like their whole other like topic, but basically like you've all definitely heard of miners in with reference to Bitcoin. And so these people who mine, they are able to they're all searching at the same time to find the next block. And so if you are one of those miners, for example, you would include everyone's transactions who have sent those transactions to you. And they're stored in something called a mempool, but like that's very nitty gritty. So I don't really want to confuse anyone by like talking about that. But basically like you get sent transactions, and then each of those transactions, there's like a tiny bit that like you get paid for including that transaction into your block. And so there's an incentive in it. So this is an example of one of the economic incentive alignments that I talked about earlier. So you're incentivized to include as many transactions as you can into that block. Does that make sense?
Kind of, thank you. I'll keep listening.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, this is something that like, I'm not even kidding, started making sense to me maybe a month ago. So like, it's a learning process and you kind of just have to keep hearing these terms. And then one day you're like, be like, oh my God, I actually understand a lot more of this than I thought I did. But yeah, please keep asking questions.
Yeah, I think when I took the course, there's nothing that I understood in the first day too. So do not worry if it takes a little time. That's the way it is for everyone or for most people. Okay, and I think we'll keep moving on. We'll go on to the next part. Okay, consensus. So let's get right into it. So I know we've talked a little bit about consensus throughout the lecture so far, but we'll get into how we interact with it and why it's so important. And so consensus for us is the process by which a network's participants come to agreement on some sort of decision. And so it's more of like a very pinpointed term. Like maybe you've heard consensus as a way of like, maybe we all agree on where we want to go to dinner. And in that case, we'd all have to choose the exact same spot and be on the same page. But in our case, agreeing on changes or agreeing on consensus means like being able to have enough agreement so that we can make a change to our ledger of transactions or our like note stock on our phone of transactions that we use to keep track of everything. And so in a centralized model, it's pretty straightforward. We just trust that the bank will do the right thing. And so all these transactions are run through banks, and we assume that the banks will act with our best intentions in mind and they won't be corrupt. And because of this, it works really efficiently because there's just one person in charge, one person at the wheel. However, with Bitcoin and blockchain, we need to start to transition into different forms of like distributed consensus. And so we can start with like one main idea, like one initial idea. And so this is the idea of like naive consensus. And so like these names that I'll go through with consensus aren't really official names, but they're just ways to understand different forms of consensus and kind of hone in on why we choose the method that we do use. And so we have consensus, naive consensus. And what this means is everyone is kind of just doing their own thing. And then once they see some kind of transaction pop up on their screen or whatever it is, they will disagree with it. And they'll just say, okay, sounds good, let's allow it. And so everyone is just, every time they get a transaction or a new block is added to the chain, they will just accept it. And so one of the challenges with this, as you can probably guess, is the idea of a double spend attack. And what this means is if Alice has like one Bitcoin and she wants to buy an iPhone from Carol and a Mac from Bob, with naive consensus, if everyone just agrees every transaction that happens, then I can take my one Bitcoin, or Alice can take her one Bitcoin and send it to Carol, but then at the same time, take that same one Bitcoin to Bob. And so if we think with like fiat currencies like the dollar or euro, we can't really do this. Like if I go to a store and give someone $5 for a candy bar or whatever it is, I can't get those $5 back. I have my candy bar and I've spent that $5. But with Bitcoin, with naive consensus, if we want to spend a currency once and then reuse that currency, just because we can like copy and paste it essentially, we can find that like through naive consensus, it's really challenging to detect when a certain currency has been spent multiple times. And this artificially inflates the value of Bitcoin if you can spend it 100 times or 1,000 times. Because instead of just having $38,000, where whatever one Bitcoin is worth now, you can have much, much more than that. Okay, and so another take on consensus or something else we can try is the idea of democratic consensus. And so now if we try the same attack that we tried earlier, we have Alice trying to spend the same Bitcoin multiple times with multiple different people. If everyone interacts with each other and everyone votes democratically on consensus to agree with like how the transactions are going, then we see that because Carol and Bob and Dan are actually paying attention and they're interacting with each other and comparing their own transactions, we see that, well, Alice only has one Bitcoin. Alice doesn't have two Bitcoins. And so because of that, just like in the same way that we can't go into debt or spend more Bitcoin than we have, everyone sees that Alice only has one Bitcoin. And so they disagree and they just say that this transaction is not valid. And so by invalidating it, then we don't add it to the network and Alice can't get away with this double spending problem. But the problem is because it's so simple to make multiple identities and have different accounts, Alice can just make a bunch of different versions of herself. And so you can have Alice 2, 3, and 4. So now, because of all the different computers and devices, if it's a purely democratic system, then Alice actually is taking control over the network, because in terms of voting, Alice has 4 votes and everyone else has 3. And so Alice can just okay all the different transactions on this network and really just have an artificially and an infinitely inflated amount of Bitcoin to interact with. And so that's why we see there's an issue with like a democratic consensus approach. But finally, something that Bitcoin uses is called Nakamoto consensus. And rather than, it uses like a combination of what we saw earlier as democratic consensus and voting, but it also requires that like an idea of like a brute force computation. And so like a good analogy for what it requires is, so imagine like each device has to like solve its own puzzle. And so this puzzle, like if you're thinking of metaphorically speaking, is the idea of like covering your eyes or blindfolding yourself and just blindly throwing darts at a dartboard. And imagine that the only time when you can actually propose the next block or can actually go on to the next stage of the transaction is when you've hit that bullseye. And so imagine you're 100 feet away and you're trying to throw darts at a dartboard and hit a bullseye like this big. It's gonna take a lot of time and it's gonna be really difficult to do so. And so there's actually no way that you can fake doing all this like work or this process of trying to throw darts to the dartboard and hit the bullseye. And the reason why this is so effective is because, let's say you have like an infinite number of darts. After a while, you can look at the dartboard and see that I've thrown hundreds of thousands of darts. And I can see that when I see a dart that's in like the target, then I know that it's actually, then I like solve the puzzle and I'm able to go on with the next step. And so due to this like brute force computation, which you can think of as like throwing darts to the dartboard, we know exactly who solved like the next round of the puzzle, or like pretty much who is able to propose the next block. And sorry, we haven't really gotten to some of these terms yet, so this part may be confusing, but pretty much because the resource that is being expended in this scenario is like computational energy, Alice only has so much like computational power. Like she may only have like a computer and a phone or whatever it may be. And so if Alice were to divide all of her resources to a bunch of different accounts, there's no way that she'll be able to like fully put all of her work into, or like her effort into like this Alice one account. And because of this, it's really improbable and it's not effective for Alice to make a bunch of different accounts, because there's no way that she'll hit the dartboard first if instead of trying to throw darts at one dartboard, she's spinning around and throwing them at 4 different dartboards here. And so each account really, or each device or that you make really lowers your probability of solving the puzzle and getting like the cash rewards involved with consensus. So that was definitely a lot. I'm sorry that I kind of strayed off a little bit with a few analogies, but I'd love to hear some questions if anyone has any.
They're asking good questions.
Okay.
So if Alice has a lot of devices, she's going to be spending so much money just on pure electricity and computational power that it actually doesn't really make sense, probability like at all. Doesn't make any sense. And like the amount of devices that you would need in order to actually successfully like execute an attack is, I don't even want to think about that number, or how much money it would cost to run. And then what if it's a group of mathematicians? So these are brute force computations, and we'll get into exactly what that computation is when we get into that mining lecture. But like mathematician or English major or no, like literally is illiterate and enumerate, they all have the same chance of getting that puzzle, which is a cool part of this.
Then I see some questions are just about a lot of devices. And so this is something that happens a lot with Bitcoin. And one of the flaws of it is if you have millions or billions of dollars worth of devices, then you're that much more likely to solve the puzzle first and get like the cash rewards involved with Bitcoin. And so that's why there are like mining farms in different parts of the world where there are like millions of dollars worth of devices, all taking up tons of power just towards solving this puzzle and getting the rewards. And so I think out of like the energy consumption, I think like by country, I think that if we were to imagine like Bitcoin mining itself as like a country, it would be 39th. So imagine out of all the countries, imagine the 39th most energy taken up is by Bitcoin alone. And that's like greater than Uruguay and Argentina, I believe, and then it's like slightly less than Sweden, or don't quote me on that. I'm not positive about that, but it just saps up so much energy.
Yeah, Con.
How long would a transaction, how long would it take for a transaction to take place if there's like so many different puzzles that need to be solved, and who generates these puzzles?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that's one of the like major cons with Bitcoin and blockchains is in general is just that like it's not as efficient, right? Because it takes more time because you have to do all of this work. And so I think that I can answer this question. Also, another question I saw, do people have to expend significant resources when they want to participate in a transaction? So no, only miners are expending those resources. You can fully operate on the Bitcoin network, send and receive transactions and never mine and never have to expend any computational resource. And then also, Con, to answer your question, so a transaction typically takes about 10 minutes. A block typically is like mined every 10 minutes. And so, but you usually want to wait about an hour after your transaction has been included in a block in order to confirm that like, you know, the block that your transaction was added to is actually like that's the blockchain that people are using. And so after about an hour, you will have 5 blocks added on top of yours, which is usually a pretty good sign. Like, oh, okay, people are adding on top of this. Like, this is a pretty valid chain. People are seeing this and broadcasting it to more people. But yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest cons, is that it does is that it does take a long time.
And so one of the things about the actual puzzle is it automatically adjusts to the size of the pool. And so they change these, it changes automatically so that regardless of how big the system is, it'll change the puzzle so that it becomes easier or harder, so that it averages out, so that blocks are mined once every 10 minutes. So it keeps this number pretty constant. And then
I think there was a pretty big issue with people using campus electricity to mine. Like, I remember that being a thing. I don't think you can do it anymore though. I don't know, maybe someone else can tell me.
that's why all the outlets of dough are always taken up.
Is every wallet a node on the Bitcoin like infrastructure, or is it, or like, at least a blockchain infrastructure, or is it or can you be a user and still not be a node on the?
Yes. Yeah. And so we're going to get into all different types of nodes. So we have heavy nodes, light nodes, SPV nodes. Like, there's so many different types of nodes acting in this network that that will also be in a future lecture. But you by no means need to be running. You don't need to be downloading the entire history of blockchain or Bitcoin in order to interact with the network. And like at its most like lightest, I guess, you can like have an account on Coinbase, you know, and like you're never actually come into contact with the Bitcoin network.
Okay, well, let's keep going to the next section, and then we can ask questions. And one more hand. Okay, yeah, go for it. And we'll move on.
Just one question. I'm sorry. So how long does it take to like for the transaction? I don't know if you already said this, but like if you're trying to double spend money while it takes like in that time where you're spending it, can you like spend it again, like twice? Because it takes I guess a little bit of time for your transaction to execute. Can you spend it that same money twice?
Yeah.
How
So
does
the way
Bitcoin prevent that?
Yeah. So actually, that's a pretty complicated topic that we'll get into in a few lectures. If you want, we can talk about it a little after, but we have a whole lecture allotted to that, just because it is a pretty like interesting but also intricate topic. And so I can stick around after if you want to go into that a little more, but we'll save it for later on. Okay, and then we'll just run through a quick recap. So, and we know we threw a lot at you, but just in general, so Bitcoin can be a currency, and these are the reasons why, going back to what Ala said at the beginning. So for starters, it is durable. And so even recently, people do believe in blockchain, and it's every blockchain transaction that we have will stay forever. And as long as there are people that are working in the network and they uphold the network just by participating, and that means like providing energy and keeping the network whole, then every transaction will be permanent at like forever. And so portability, you can keep your whole like blockchain or your whole Bitcoin currency, or your whole everything you well, I'm forgetting the word. Anyway, all of your Bitcoin, you can keep that in your wallet, and whether it's like an online, like a flash drive, or something you store online, you can always have your private key with you and access your balance. And divisible. And so you don't, just as some of you might know, you don't need to actually buy one full Bitcoin. You can buy anything from as many full ones as you want to one times 10 to the -8, which is called a Satoshi. And that's like the smallest unit you can buy. And that is this number right here. So you can buy really small quantities of Bitcoin. And then uniformity. So no single block, like Bitcoin, is worth more than a different one. And so because of this, you know that just like $1 here is like $1 I have is as much as $1 Ava has is worth. That's the same with Bitcoin. And then there is a limited supply. And so this does ensure that we can still interact with the Bitcoin, and like laws of supply and demand do exist. And so there is a finite cap of 21 million Bitcoin. And so, and actually as a fun fact, we're getting pretty close to this cap, because as Bitcoin are constantly being mined and like created, we're getting really close to 21 million. Like we're almost at 19 million right now. So the question is, what happens when we hit 21 million? And then acceptability. And then even more so recently, now with all the news about Bitcoin, out in the world, people do believe in it and are investing in it and can actually see it as a foreseeable transaction or currency vehicle for the future. And so just to sum up Bitcoin, a lot of it comes down to your identity. So these are the few key components to remember. If there's 4 things to learn from today, here they are. So first off, you have your identity. And so this has to do with your public and private keys. And so your public key is like your address and like what everyone can see to connect to your Bitcoin, and your private key is how you cash in on it and interact with it. And then you have your transactions. So you own a set of UTXOs that you can input into transactions. And just like Ava said, you have your own like piggy banks or different containers for Bitcoin that you can distribute or keep to yourself. And then we have the distributed ledger, which just shows how each party is responsible for having a copy of the blockchain. And so everyone has their own copy, so you can cross-reference it with each other, and they can figure out who's trying to tamper with with their own transactions, and maybe who's trying to spend something twice or act maliciously. And then finally, we have trustless consensus. So our transactions, which are approved via proof of work, which is like our blindly throwing darts mechanism. And then we have like our voting process. And these are all ways to ensure that we don't have people who come in and try to attack the network and try to game the system. And so these are all ways that Bitcoin's like stability, while being fully online, can interact very similarly to like an actual fiat currency and can actually hold its value. Any questions about any of that?
Yay. I remember when I was in this class, the trustless consensus was so confusing for me because I didn't really understand what proof of work meant or why you had to spend resources. So if anyone has questions on that, like feel free to ask. The way that I think about it now is just like in order to kind of limit the amount of people who can be mining and to prove that these people are like committed to the network, they just have to do a lot of work in order to get that Bitcoin out of mining. And so this disincentivizes people from creating multiple accounts because that's like a lot of computational power they then need to put in and so on. But like we said, we have a whole lecture 6 is all about consensus mechanisms. And so we'll get all into that. Yes, Jose, is your hand still up?
One thing I want to say quickly before questions. Well, just so everyone knows too, this is it for our lecture, but we'll stick around for as long as people want to for questions. Before people leave, just so we can send off the attendance form.
Yeah, I'll send it.
You'll send that in the chat. So it's just a little quiz, just asking for name, student ID, some info about you. And this is so we can add you to the B courses and then officially send you an enrollment code, so you can enroll on Cal Central. And so fill this out. There's just 2 questions on here, low stakes, just write whatever comes to mind and like what you learned from today, or maybe what you knew from earlier. And so, yeah, that'll close at midnight at 11:59 p.m. Friday, so Pacific Standard Time. And then, okay, let's see. It's sent out.
Perfect. Let me know if you guys have any trouble with the Google form. In the future, these will be on B courses, but just for now.
Yeah, just the first one.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I'll stop sharing, and then we can. I'm going to unspotlight us so we can see everyone else as well.
Yay. The enrollment status. Oh, I just mean if you got an email that you were enrolled in the class, like you're accepted, then you're enrolled. And if you plan to enroll, yeah, I'll send the link again. But if you're just here to like learn more about Bitcoin, you don't want to take it for units, you're auditing, then you would just say audit. Yeah, of course. I did, yeah.
You said that like it's hitting the cap of 21 million. There are like 19 million right now. Would that like hypothetically make the value of it like skyrocket when it hits that 21 million mark because its availability is so low?
That's, yeah, it really comes down to the idea of scarcity and how if there aren't really many more, like if it's almost not really, if it's infeasible to get more Bitcoin because you can't just mine them or put computational power, then the transition will come out like away from Bitcoin as like a currency, more towards Bitcoin as an investment vehicle. And so we see that a lot less energy will go towards like kind of mining more coins, because it's just at a certain point you can't, as much as you want to help the network, you can't really mine the coin the same way as you could before. And so just in terms of let's see, now because everyone already knows it's capped, it's priced in. Yeah, and so that's a great point too, is because like the cap is like the actual max of like the cap is already factored in. We see that the that influences a lot of the. Sorry, I totally forgot what I was going to say. Like, give me a sec. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like right now it was intention. Its intention was to be used as a currency, but right now it's kind of being used as an investment. So I know like those are the answers I think a lot of people want to know, but no one knows. I think Nick makes a good point. Like people already know that its supply is capped. Yeah, a lot of Bitcoin is already lost. I think there's actually like, I think only going to be, I actually don't, I don't know the exact number, so I'm not going to say anything. But yeah, so like no one really knows what's going to happen to the value of Bitcoin, but one can imagine that the lack of accessibility to Bitcoin could drive the value up for sure. Does that answer your question? Probably not. Yeah, Colin.
I think Aditya's hand was up before me.
Oh, you do still, is there more to your question?
No, I'm good, my bad.
Okay, no, you're all good. Also, the quiz counts towards, so a big part of your grade is participation. And so the quiz counts towards your participation grade. We're not going to grade you on like how correct your answers are.
I was wondering, can we ever expect the like the volatility to stabilize? I mean, it's like very volatile right now, the currency. So can we ever expect this volatility to stabilize, decrease for the Bitcoin's value?
Yeah, so actually some of the most highly paid economists and Bitcoin like enthusiasts are really putting most of the time into figuring that out. And so really depending on who you're asked, you'll get different answers. And so at least my take, and of course this does not represent anyone else like in the club or I mean, I guess anyone else in the world, but I'm thinking that just in terms of, we know that a lot of volatility comes from like expected inflation and overall like how the value of something will change in the future. And because of this, if people believe, and yes, class is over, so you're welcome to head out whenever. Thank you everyone for dropping in, and we'll stick around for questions.
Yeah, make sure you just complete that attendance quiz because that's how we're going to know you were here today. But once you do that, you're free to go.
So in terms of just expected inflation, we know that we see that the value of Bitcoin keeps rising. And so because of this, more and more people are just investing and pouring money into Bitcoin itself. And because of that, it'll just keep raising higher and higher until it gets to a point where other factors influence it more. And so if we see some like negative news about Bitcoin and we see how that is actually like that could actually directly like slow down the price and overall desire behind getting Bitcoin. And so let me see. What is this? In the category. Does that make sense at all? I mean, that's just my thoughts, but that could be because no one really knows. So
yeah, it makes sense. I think I read somewhere that once it's like more mainstream, I think PayPal authorized a couple, like some 30 million businesses to operate on Bitcoin. I think when it maybe becomes more mainstream, the value can stabilize. That's what I read, but I don't know if that's valid or not.
And actually, so a lot of that comes from, it's going to be dictated by, there's actually a big lawsuit between Ripple and the SEC. And so Ripple is a few things. It's a currency, it's like a utility token, but also a company. And so Ripple is, yeah. And so if anyone's heard about it, there's a lawsuit going on against the SEC, which controls a lot of like the stock markets. But what it is saying is because Ripple is somewhat privately owned, and like I won't get into too many of the nuances, they're saying that Ripple should have to interact in this as like any other kind of stock, because it is being traded and like shares are distributed in a certain way where it is similar enough that it doesn't necessarily bypass all of the regulations that are given to cryptocurrencies, and instead has to be treated as something more tangible. And so after this lawsuit, if Ripple does have to be treated as like a stock or some kind of other non-crypto entity, then that'll influence like the price of Ripple, but then also like the standards going forward. And because of this, we'll see that like a lot of cryptocurrencies or tokens won't be able to get away, or maybe get away is not the right word. They won't be able to kind of exist in the same capacity that they do now. And so what this might do is lower the prices pretty dramatically. Okay. Any other, let's see, your hands. So I'm just scanning the chat right now. Won't hitting the cap take a while. So one thing about the cap and hitting the cap is, yes, it will take a while, but because about 6.625 Bitcoins are mined every hour, no. Okay, well, anyway, it's a consistent rate. So it is a linear increase in or like a consistent increase in the amount of Bitcoin that are mined. And because of that, it will hit the cap relatively soon. And that's expected to be in 2021 or 2022. And I think what you might be thinking about, Ryder, is in terms of like discrete and like not converging, that is with the like consistent rate of blocks that are mined. And so that stays consistent at 1 block every 10 minutes and like on average. And so like that rate stays the same. And of course, over time, if we get a block every 10 minutes, then soon enough, we will get to our cap.
That's a good question, Rashab. So and that's what like a lot of people are wondering, if they're not going to get their like 1 Bitcoin payment for adding the block, then why would they spend all this time mining? And so what people think is going to happen is that these little transaction costs right now that people have, when they create a transaction, they have to include a little something for the miner. Obviously, the higher your transaction cost, the more likely your miner is going to like swoop that up and include it in the newest block. So once Bitcoin in 2140, once there's no more Bitcoin to be mined, we think that these transaction costs are going to be higher. And that's why miners are going to be incentivized to continue to mine.
Yeah, exactly. So transaction costs are going to be a lot higher, and we might see different currencies taking on like these transaction costs. And so people maybe, and like we've already seen this transition out of Bitcoin and out of Bitcoin networks to different networks. So whether it's Ethereum, it's a common one, Ripple, like MakerDAO, it's a stable coin that has consistent value pegged to the US dollar. There are a lot of different takes on like the traditional Bitcoin process that are solving these future needs that we expect. So like once we reach the cap, then we can see these other currencies start to step into the spotlight a little bit more. Dogecoin. Yeah, so I actually haven't paid tuition yet. Instead, I've poured all my tuition into Dogecoin. No, I didn't, but that's actually skyrocketing nowadays, which I think is hilarious.
So transaction costs are being given to miners now. Like they're a thing now that transactions like include. And like I said, like if you have a lower transaction cost, you're gonna be less likely to include it in the next block because that miner won't get it. Whereas if you have a higher cost. So it is in the source code as is. So transaction cost isn't by bid. The miner will just do that like whole puzzle thing to find the next block, which we'll get into, but you can just think about it as like a brute force puzzle, like throwing darts randomly. And so once that miner finds that block, it'll collect all the transactions that it sees nearby. And it's more likely to collect transactions that have a higher transaction cost, if that makes sense. What are your favorite coins? I'm embarrassingly not into DeFi as much as I wish I was. But Nate is.
Okay, I'll give some. I'm getting a lot of private messages that I'll say Dogecoins, so I guess I can throw that in there. Um,
That has to be there.
okay, so I have a pretty traditional take on a lot of the coins. So of course it all varies. I'll just give like my 5 in general, and I won't get into it too much. But the reasoning for this is, of course, it depends on. There are a lot of factors that go into it, but 5 that I really like. So I actually would not put Bitcoin in my top 5. So I think Bitcoin is. I mean, that might be a hot take, but
That is such
Bitcoin's
a
not my
hot
top.
take.
Oh no. So I have Ethereum, and I think Ethereum, Ripple. I throw in DAO, a Maker DAO, which makes DAI, and that's like a form of stable coin.
That's a good one.
And then my I'm gonna steal Elon Musk. No, not quite. Litecoin is another one that I'm definitely been looking a lot into. And then Binance. So Binance is a different platform that has its own currency. And so let's see. Link Uni. Pretty solid. Yeah. And also there's so many out there, and like more and more every day, that it gets to the point where the coin that you might have known a few weeks ago is completely different in more ways than just the price.
Yeah.
Do you think Ethereum is more dependable than Bitcoin as far as prices go, since it's more, I guess, because more developers use it?
I think Ethereum is.
Do you think?
Do I? Yeah. Well, so I think that especially with Ethereum 2.0 coming out soon, that'll be a great they'll make a lot of big improvements in scalability and overall just ease of transaction. And so at least for Ethereum, because it is a little more stable and down to earth, like you do lose a few more components because you have like more entities involved, and it's like in terms of governance tokens, like there's kind of more intricacy to it. But at least with like versus Bitcoin, where as we've seen recently, it can be all over the place. And so that's why I do think that Ethereum tends to be a little more reliable. I don't know if stable is the right word, but if you had to ask me, I'd like put more into Ethereum than I would in Bitcoin.
That's so surprising. I also, has anyone heard of the Brave Attention token? That's like, it's not, yeah, thank you. It's not like, I wouldn't invest in it, but it's, yeah, Brave browser, exactly. I think it's a really cool idea. I haven't looked that much into it, but it's basically like its aim is to reimburse like the people who it's basically about how like us as just individuals are constantly being fed advertisements online, and our clicks are contributing to those companies like data, and they're saying like, oh, like this advertisement did well, blah blah blah. Like we're essentially like, we are like sources of revenue for them because our attention is like what's giving them like our attention, our data, it's what's enabling them to know which products are working and which products aren't. And so BAT is Brave Attention Token is basically trying to like close that gap between like our effort that we're putting into it and how these advertisers are the ones that are actually profiting. And so it's trying to actually pay us for the attention that we're giving, which I think is pretty cool.
Okay, I see a question in the chat about Dogecoin. So actually, my younger brother came up with he called me frantically and said, whatever you do, invest in Dogecoin right now. And I looked at him and I said, like, there's no way I'm putting any money towards Dogecoin. Not just because it is a pretty, I kind of think of it as like a very Gen Z coin, like something that's based off of a meme, but I do think it's hilarious and love the idea of it. But the reason why like the price is increasing is because you have so many people who are linked together and kind of like bonding together through it and investing money in it. And so, I guess those are my thoughts. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but. Okay, who do you mean by regulators? Like GameStop. GameStop. So which regulators? Because at least now, like going back to the Ripple lawsuit, like crypto regulation is pretty up in the air, and so a lot of it comes down to, the people who, which one regulators? Like if the SEC or other like government institutions are actually going to do something about it. And so like once that precedent is set, then we'll see how like Elon Musk's tweets will be influenced, and if Dogecoin will have to change their tactics or abide by certain regulations. And so that's yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, Nate, I got a question for you. What are you excited about blockchain in the next 5, 10 years, 15?
What am I excited about? So I'm pretty into DeFi, but something I've been getting into pretty recently is like decentralized apps. And so getting to build apps based on blockchain, and a project I'm actually working on now with my job is finding a way to create a voting platform. And so building out this voting platform that can allow people, and it like mainly targets towards like the elderly and people who are really at risk of COVID-19 in the pandemic, and allowing them to verify their identities online and then actually vote. And so it's something we're trying to roll out in the next few months and then hopefully implement on a larger scale. So, I mean, ideally we would have gotten it done before the past November, but hopefully for the next round of elections, we'll be able to make some serious progress.
How are you mixing blockchain into this? How is that working? What's the architecture, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so just the idea of like, as we have our identities, we can use, and like, this is like I'll try to give like the most broad overview I can, but just in terms of basics, we're using blockchain as a way to track the ledger. Like we can use our ledger and have everyone like verify their identity and then keep their identity stored on this blockchain. And because of that, just like my identity right now, because I have a driver's license, is stored in a government database, identities can be cross-referenced with like blockchain ledgers and with government databases. And if it's a government-owned and like slightly privatized network, then we can see the government using this as an official form of regulation or of acceptance for voting.
I see that. Cool.
I save your money. I'll think of some. I'll find some really obscure ones that I think are definitely going nowhere. That's hilarious though. So say what word? I'm getting recorded. I can't say that. Okay. I'm not. Yeah, I have to be careful not to, because I can give like my radical takes. Clearly, just off from what Ava said earlier, I kind of have some hot takes here in the world of DeFi and crypto. So,
yo, dude, let it hear it, man. I wanna know what it is. Like, what do you think about DeFi? Where's that going?
DeFi, like, what part about it? There's so much to it.
Okay, so what's your like the biggest project that you see that's gonna go mainstream?
So anyway, something that I've really been interested in is actually one of the companies that went through the last batch of the Berkeley Blockchain Xcelerator. And so what it focuses on is the idea of being able to connect like lenders and buyers in terms of loans, and doing this through blockchain. And what I really like about this company is they're using like a ledger as a way to track all the different transactions and like user profiles, so that they can take your kind of income and like a bunch of different information about you, like credit score and just kind of historical bank information, and completely remove banks out of the process of like controlling who gets loans. Because like in the past, loans have been really controlled by banks, and so banks have all the say in who they want to give loans to. But now the company it's called Calypso, and I've been looking a lot into them, and what they're doing is empowering different households to do so. And by using like a reverse auction process, because banks make so much money from loans, they're making people and like individual people who are looking for loans in higher demand, so that banks actually have to compete with other banks to be able to provide a loan to the clients involved. And so what the project is doing is just using like reverse loan auction process and using blockchain and DeFi to facilitate this process.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of having loans be more accessible. Also, I think that's something that DeFi is really, really succeeding in, like with Compound and such.
Yeah, and so I saw a question. Are they so a little different between that this like what I was talking about is, so Aave kind of focuses more on like different tokens and liquidity. And so it's more of like a non-custodial protocol. And instead it has to do with earning interest on different assets. And so rather than actually earning interest, this works just directly on loans and connects banks and lenders, or like lenders and borrowers. And so like there's less of an interest component involved, but instead it's just saving money for people who are looking for loans and actually getting reasonable rates of return and like removing some aspects of collateral. So that's does that make sense at all? Yeah, sweet.
Yo, aside from DeFi, what else is there?
How much time do you have? I've been talking a lot,
That's
so
what I'm here for.
I'll let Ava talk a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear both of you.
Wait, I'm so sorry. My dad has been texting me because he wanted to come, and he hasn't been able to get in. So what was the question?
I'll invite him.
No, you're all good. Yeah, thank you. What was the question?
Yeah, what aside from DeFi, what else is there going on in the blockchain space?
There's a lot going on. I mean, like I said, like Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency to use blockchain, but now it's being used for like voting platforms, like what Nate's working on. It's used a lot in supply chains because there's a lot of issues with provenance and like where these materials came from. A lot of these companies are being pressed about where their supply chains start and end. And so let's say for diamonds, you can actually give a unique ID on a blockchain. And so then that'll be stored permanently. And like every single person in the supply chain then can like say, oh, I got this ID, and that'll be stored permanently. And like that way companies can check and see exactly the origins of, where their resources are coming from. So like those are some cool use cases. There's like so many coming out every day.
Diamond transactions. I haven't heard of that. That's interesting.
Yeah, very cool.
Is there anything that excites you? Like something that you'd be interested in getting into?
I'm really interested in like just researching like what's happening and like mainly education. That's kind of why I wanted to be in this department. I care a lot about just like spreading, the knowledge that like of what blockchain is, because a lot of people don't know what it is.
I feel that it's hard. It's a complicated subject. There's a lot of moving parts. It's technical as hell, and so it deals with money too. So but you do really well. I mean, you know yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, Nate and I try.
So do you, Nate? I mean, DeFi is a really tough cookie to crack, and I mean, all respect to anybody who dives into that rabbit hole.
I would just like to spread the knowledge, spread the wealth, everything involved there. And we're like I said, we're learning as much as you are. So that's why I love having
we're all in this
discussions
together. Absolutely. I mean, I'm learning from you. You're learning from me. It's all love.
Yeah, precisely.
Thank you guys so much for coming. You guys, this was like a great first lecture. This was Nate and I's first time ever teaching this decal. So we were definitely like fair share of nerves, but you guys were great.
You guys definitely did a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you're all the troopers sticking around till the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, it's all I do. I just try to figure out blockchain any way I can, and if I got other people to talk to about it, why not?
That's awesome.
I was wondering if there's this decal class for 3 units. I put it in the chat, but I don't know if it was answered. Is it part of the same program, like of the blockchain at Berkeley? Or is it like a different club or something like that? It's a 3 units decal for learning how to program. It is?
Yeah. So actually, one of my colleagues from work, so Seyon Chung runs that. And so it is a blockchain course through blockchain at Berkeley. So we actually teach 3 courses. So we teach this one, blockchain fundamentals. We teach blockchain for developers, which also meets 6 to 8 on Thursdays. And then we have the 3rd course, which is, I believe it's web development or web like integration, like using APIs and other components there. So definitely check that one out if you're interested next semester. There might still be spots now, but
Okay.
Start off with this one. Yeah.
Thanks.
Totally.
Can y'all take a moment and just talk about blockchain at Berkeley in general, just the community itself?
Yeah, for sure. So it's a club like any other club. Nate and I both were new last semester. And it's a really awesome community. I mean, like it's a bunch of people who are really passionate about blockchain. So like they're just like constant discussions going on all the time. And something that I really like about it is that like no one's too serious ever. It's like very like there's this whole community aspect to it. We do a lot of cool stuff. Like Nate and I are involved in education, but we also do consulting. We have a whole department for developers. The next time to join would be fall 2021. We just had our application cycle. But if you get excited about blockchain, like Nate and I both did, then please apply. It's like the best club. Like I can go on and talk about it forever, but I really recommend like even just going through the first info session for the application. I feel like that they'll definitely give you a better sense of like the club as a whole.
Awesome. I mean, I'd love to join.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Sweet. Well, thank you, everyone. This is a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking around. And then we'll catch you all next week for lecture 2.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.